let's cover some basic disability law basics. It really was come out of the aspect of some of it is social aspect of trying to sit down and look at the overall labor market. A large part of it is just the humanity of actually opening doors for a lot of different aspects of it. The ADA, quite frankly, if you look back to the Act of 1990, we're a couple decades out from that. Prior to this act, most people, if you're bound to a wheelchair, you had to face the prospect of actually approaching a curb in any American city and then getting your front wheels to fall off the top of the curb, hit 4 to 6 inches down, hopefully not falling out of the chair, and then you had to figure out how to get the back wheels down without also jarring your back on top of it. It really was a difficult situation, including the aspect of trying to get your wheelchair through a 30-inch doorway when the wheelbase for a wheelchair is normally 28 inches. And so you have a small space to have your hands and also between that and the door frame. So the probability of you hitting your fingers into the door frame was relatively high. A lot of those small different details, and I'm just talking about one specific disability as to what is out there and what people had to cope with. The ADA did a lot of things. It was an extraordinarily expensive act if you want to look at the measurement, what it did to the nation, except for the fact it opened many, many doors. So from a statutory basis, it actually has done probably one of the best social aspects of it. It opened new doorways for a lot of people that couldn't get around before. And also it changed a couple of other things on top of that. We talked about the employability. The Vocational Rehabilitation Act, which really applies primarily to anybody that receives federal financing, also is there as well. And pretty much the sole reason for the disability to be included or denied benefits, you really have to have, if you're going to be involved with a federal grant of any type, you have to pay attention to the contents of this act on top of it. The two of them really work in tandem together. If you look on the aspect, the poverty rate, if you have a major disability that impairs one of your life activities, okay, your poverty rate is 25% versus 11% for those with no disabilities. It's more than twice as high. You also have 9 million Americans receiving disability benefits. From a financial perspective, if you just want to look at dollars, okay, 9 million people, if we follow this appropriately, we can remove those barriers that kept a lot of them out of the workplace. We can also improve the overall cost of living. Maybe we could even narrow down to 25%, something closer to the average population aspect of it. If you look at the employment rate, 18% for rate for this group, and unemployed rate is 12.6. You have a lot of different aspects where 1 in 4 adult Americans have some type of physical or mental disability, and this act by itself, this whole concept of the ADA and also the Vocational Rehabilitation Act, can sit down and help remove some of those barriers. If you ever deal with a displaced worker and are properly placed, they can a lot of times surpass the performance of able-bodied workers. To some extent, the fact that you have a door open to them and you provide some type of access, really, every employer should be disability blind, except for the fact that the reality is a lot of it is apparent. If you provide something that they haven't had an opportunity before and you're that employer, my experience has been the loyalty rate that you have and the fact that you're sitting down changing things anywhere from something simple from a visual aspect of it, some type of deaf aspect of it, some type of mobility aspect of it, some type of a mental disability, some type of being, on the spectrum, so to speak. Also, there's a lot of things where you have that aspect where they're comfortable with that, and the probability of the turnover rate, in my experience, what I've seen the numbers, they tend to be lower than that of other groups. So when we come down to the Vocational Rehabilitation Act, it applies for government workers and any firm that does business with the government. Section 504 prohibits discrimination against qualified individuals with disabilities, and 503 is an affirmative action part that you also have to include if you have a federal contract of $50,000 or more. So you look on the aspect of how this opens doors. These two acts on their own have helped open the doors for many people where they had the doors closed before, and it's really upgraded the living aspect of these that were involved as well. Couple amendments. If you look on the ADA, they amended it in 2008. It really makes the ADA more broadly interpreted and also enabled new claims that are less severe, whether intermittent or even temporary disabilities. So on this one, the realities about discrimination, employers can't question applicants about specific disabilities, only about their ability to engage in specific business-related activities. Can you do the work? And then also, sometimes you have to alter the working environment to accommodate a disabled applicant or employee. I had one of the strangest cases I ever saw about disability discrimination. It really wasn't disability discrimination, except she was short. So she wanted to be a bus driver. Now, I want you to visualize what that means. She's going to be in a bus transporting students, and she was a whole 4'10". We figured out that I told my mechanic, can you get the bus to do this? And he says, well, okay. We actually put pieces of 4x4 wood on top of all the different brake pedals and elevated her seat. She was actually a bus driver, and she was still there 7 years, at least after I left the employment of that place, still being a great bus driver. You know what? It doesn't seem like much, but you know what? We got a determined employee who was loyal because of the fact that, number one, the pay was pretty good. It was one of those things for a bus driver, their schedules are pretty tough. But on top of that, we made an accommodation for her, and there's a certain amount of respect because of the fact we're treating people with dignity and respect in the whole process. Number three, employees with disabilities, they have no more rights to their jobs than do non-disabled applicants. If they don't perform, you have the ability to terminate them, but make certain you cross your T's, you dot your I's, you make certain you treat them like everybody else, do the annual evaluation. All those things are all part of that. HIV status is considered to be a disability under ADA, and also several others. They're not limited just to physical disabilities, but also some mental disabilities on top of that. If you need to see if they can do the work, if you have a reasonable accommodation for a pre-employment test, by the time you're all done, it doesn't automatically disqualify somebody if you can make an accommodation in the process as well. So what constitutes a disability or disability discrimination? Where do you draw the line? A lot of times employers look at the disability and does this disqualify the person because that person can cause the employer to spend extra money. What does extra money mean? It just depends. If it's the cost of half a paycheck is the old standard. They modified it recently in 2008 as well. So on accommodations, it's unclear how much accommodations is too much to require of employers. Where to draw the line. If they're disabled, pay attention to what it is. If they can sit down and say, you're treating me differently than other people, you have to pay attention to that. If they suffered some type of adverse employment decision, such as termination, demotion, or failure to hire, you may have to be accountable for that. So make certain when you go through the hiring process, you treat everybody with dignity and respect. And by the time you're done with that, make certain that you don't look on the disability if they can do the job, if the workplace can handle whatever disability may be. Make certain you don't exclude them for that aspect of it, and you can really prove it as well. Here's a chart that talks about disparate treatment. Look on this and see where it would fit in the aspect of, can they do the work? That's what it's all about. If you can open the door, you may end up having a long-term employee there. A couple things. Know about ADA. That's a big deal. Know the terminology. Nobody calls it the American Disabilities Act. They normally call it the ADA. Know about the Vocational Rehabilitation Act. And disabilities they're not always apparent. Sometimes somebody may have a disability and you can't see it, and they may not want to present it unless they really have to do so. And there's also the social aspects of disability employment. If you have somebody that's disabled, you may be actually changing somebody's entire life cycle in the aspect of pulling somebody out of poverty, getting them a good job, and having a good long-term employee. I've had a lot of people from anywhere from physical disabilities to mental disabilities. And if you sit down there and structure the work environment right, you too can have a wonderful employee that'll be long lasting and often do a better job than people without disabilities in the process as well. Know the basics, ADA, Vocational Rehabilitation Act, and also the disabilities that are not always apparent. Take care.